And as I move through the slides, should you have any questions, please do add them to the chat, and I will be sure to address them at the conclusion. As I mentioned, this is the AHA peer review training for unconscious bias. This is a new training for the spring program. We have not launched this previously, and we will be building on it and developing more programming in the fall.
Can I ask a question, please?
Yes, please go ahead.
Shall we have this PowerPoint?
Yes, I will share the PowerPoint and the recording at the end.
Thank you.
So while this training is new to the AHA peer review process, it is rooted both in our mission and our 2024 impact goal. The mission is to be a relentless force for a world of longer, healthier lives. Our 2024 impact goal is stated that every person deserves the opportunity for a full, healthy life. As champions for health equity, by 2024, the American Heart Association will advance cardiovascular health for all, including identifying and removing barriers to healthcare access and quality. I've listed some of our learning objectives here. Unconscious biases are social stereotypes about certain groups of people that individuals form outside their own conscious awareness. Research suggests that unconscious bias occurs automatically as the brain makes quick judgments based on our past experiences and our background. As a result of unconscious biases, certain people benefit and other people may not. In contrast, deliberate prejudices are defined as conscious bias or explicit bias. Although we all have biases, many unconscious biases tend to be exhibited toward minority groups based on factors such as class, gender, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, nationality, religious beliefs, age, disability, and more. The first step in mitigating unconscious bias is to recognize that biases are human and everyone has biases they must work on. We hope to develop strategies to become more aware of and mitigate our biases. And we want to serve as an effective ally when observing potential structural bias and unconscious bias in the AHA peer review process. We are also committed to practices that will advance a diverse investigator workforce and health equity, both within the AHA and across our partner institutions. Why are we concerned about unconscious bias in peer review? Peer review decisions award an estimated 95% of academic medical research funding. So it's crucial to understand how well the process works and where it might be improved. I've highlighted 4 types of biases that we're going to talk about throughout the presentation. And I wanted to provide some context around why we picked these biases. With respect to racial bias, NIH, as well as numerous other researchers, have published evidence that show Black applicants receive both lower impact scores and have significantly lower funding levels when compared with white and Asian applicants. There is also related evidence that the same trends are seen with both lower scores and in turn lower funding rates for females versus males. Additionally, creativity and innovation are more strongly associated with male than female stereotypes. And expectations of brilliance are both gendered and racialized, such that men are expected to be more brilliant than women and whites more brilliant than Blacks. Cronyism is a concern for many major funders, including the AHA. While we have detailed conflict of interest processes in place to counter the presence or perception of these biases, studies have shown that prior affiliation with a reviewer considerably increased a researcher's chance of funding, and that panel debate may in fact fail to counter crude forms of cronyism, since panels often cover a wide area of research, and each specific area is only represented by a few experts. So the other members may defer to the expert's knowledge. Members of funding panels may also benefit directly from their membership. One study noted that panel members submit more applications and in turn receive more research dollars. Innovation bias. Numerous studies have shown that innovative proposals may have less preceding work supporting them and hence receive less praise from peer reviewers. This lack of preceding work requires a less risk-averse mindset from the reviewer. Innovative proposals from young researchers may suffer a double disadvantage, lacking both previous work, both because of their novelty and the researcher's shorter track record. Risk aversion may also affect the preparation of applications, as one study suggests that falling success rates leads to conservatism because of the perceived increased risk associated with innovative proposals. There are many unconscious biases to be aware of. We will cover many here, but others include affinity bias, also known as similarity bias. This is the tendency people have to connect with others who share similar interests, experiences, and background. The halo effect. The halo effect is the tendency people have to place another person on a pedestal after learning something impressive about them. The opposite of the halo effect is the horn effect. This is an unconscious bias, which causes the perception of an individual to be unfairly influenced by a single negative trait. For example, if an individual uses a particular phrase that we don't like, we may subsequently begin disliking a lot of the things they say as a result. Anchoring bias. Anchoring bias is similar to both the halo and horn bias. However, it's the tendency to rely too heavily on one trait or a single piece of information. Ageism is the tendency to have negative feelings about a person based on their age. And name bias is the tendency people have to judge and prefer people with certain types of names, typically names that are of Anglo origin. While we cannot cover all types of unconscious biases that could impact peer review, we would like to focus on 7 areas in particular: confirmation bias, conformity bias, conservatism bias, expertise bias, institutional bias, gender bias, and racial bias. Please also consider within these contexts more broadly false correlations, cultural preconceptions, geographic boundaries, and language presumptions. Confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is the tendency to search for, interpret, favor, and recall information in a way that confirms or supports one's prior beliefs or values. It's an important type of cognitive bias that has a significant effect on the proper functioning of society by distorting evidence-based decision-making. People display this bias when they gather or remember information selectively, or when they interpret it in a biased way. For example, a person may cherry pick empirical data that supports their belief, ignoring the remainder of the data that is not supportive. People also tend to interpret ambiguous evidence as supporting their existing position. Conformity bias. Conformity bias is the tendency people have to behave like those around them, rather than using their own personal judgment. This is very similar to the bandwagon effect, such that the probability of one person adopting a belief increases based on the number of people who hold that belief. This is a powerful form of groupthink and is the reason why peer review meetings need to be conducted carefully and critically. The Asch conformity experiments conducted during the 1950s still hold true. These experiments revealed the degree to which a person's own opinions are influenced by those of groups. Asch found that people were willing to ignore reality and give an incorrect answer in order to conform to the rest of the group. This is critical to be mindful of during peer review, because research suggests that people are often much more prone to conform than they believe they might be. Conservatism bias. Conservatism bias occurs when people maintain their prior view without properly incorporating new information. It is very similar to anchoring bias, such that people are over-reliant on the first piece of information they hear. You consider your original opinion and the information that formed to be quite meaningful, but new information learned after the opinion has been formed is considered to be not as important. The consequence of this is that you likely took action based on old information, but aren't willing to take action on new information that may conflict with it. With respect to peer review, this might be seen as low support for innovative research, as the peer review process leans more strongly towards incremental research and discourages research into unexplored approaches. To mitigate this form of bias, AHA incorporates innovation as part of its peer review criteria for all of its programming. Expertise bias. While there are fewer studies to support this type of bias, reviewers with more expertise in the applicant's field are likely to be harsher with their evaluations. To mitigate expertise bias, please check if you are giving more credit to investigators who might be similar to you. You may have attended a similar training program or have a prior affiliation with the same institution. Use and stick to the same set of criteria for every person under consideration. If the benefit of the doubt is given to one person, please make sure that it is given to all. Additionally, please be aware of the program to which the application has been submitted. Early career investigators and trainees are trying to get to your level, so they will be prone to more rookie mistakes. Bias is also more likely to occur when there's a high level of discretion and ambiguity. If the group has to make frequent discretionary decisions, it is a good sign that we, the AHA, need to revisit our peer review criteria. While you were recruited given your high expertise and seniority, please be cognizant that this is not an evaluation of what you know, but rather an evaluation of what the applicant has been asked to present in support of their proposal. We also strive to ensure our program announcements are uniform and explicit across programs to avoid ambiguity. And when in doubt, please ask AHA staff for guidance. Institutional bias. Institutional bias refers to bias that occurs due to the reputation of the institution, the size, type, or location, or prior research conducted there. Reviewers are to adhere to the criteria stated and not assume that more popular, well-known institutions are likely to equate to an applicant being successful or having increased access to various resources, or that an applicant from a smaller institution will not be successful due to a perceived and likely unproven lack of resources. Each AHA Research Award requires peer reviewers to evaluate the environment at which the work will be performed. This might open the door for reviewers to focus on the institution itself. Again, considering the prestige, size, and personal experience, more so than the information presented solely by the applicant. Relying on assumptions of an institution from personal experience is not aligned with our designated peer review criteria. Our peer review criteria requires reviewers to evaluate the environment based on the information presented in the proposal using 3 criteria. 1, does the environment in which the work will be done contribute to the probability of success? 2, does the proposal benefit from unique features of the investigative environment and employ useful collaborative arrangements? And 3, is there evidence of institutional support? Gender bias. I'd like to spend a few slides talking about gender bias. Gender bias refers to a person receiving different treatment based on the person's real or perceived gender identity. For example, from a very early age, most of us associate the word scientist with a man. Additionally, by the age of 6, young girls are less likely than boys to view their own gender as brilliant and already believe boys are more suited to really smart activities. Additionally, 6 and 7-year-old girls avoided participating in activities that were labeled for children who are really smart. A study across more than 150 elementary and middle school teachers across the country asked their students to draw a scientist, and they found that most students across grade levels from kindergarten to 8th grade drew a white man. Additionally, people regardless of their racial and ethnic backgrounds continued to draw the white male throughout the study. Other studies over the years have also utilized the Draw a Scientist test, and the results show that even among older students, including college students, the majority of the images drawn show the scientist to be a white male. According to the UN Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, women in science, technology, engineering, and math are published less, paid less for their research, and do not advance as far as men in their careers. This results in a cyclical pattern of gender bias, wherein females occupy lower scholarly and academic STEM positions, which in turn pay less money, come with fewer research dollars, that limit their productivity, visibility, perceived impact, and ability to advance professionally and secure additional research monies. In a randomized double-blind study, a nationwide sample of science professors were asked to evaluate application materials for an undergraduate science student for a lab manager position. The application materials were identical for the male and female students. The study showed that both male and female faculty members rated the female student as less competent and less hireable, and offered the female student lower salaries and less mentoring. The study also measured the faculty participants' unintentional bias through a well-established validated scale called the Modern Sexism Scale. The study found that scores on this scale significantly predicted the lower competence and hireability ratings given to the female student. The fact that faculty members' bias was independent of their gender, scientific discipline, age, and tenure status suggests that it's likely unintentional, generated from widespread cultural stereotypes, rather than a conscious intention to discriminate against women. Additionally, the fact that faculty participants reported liking the female more than the male student further underscores the point that the results likely do not reflect faculty members' discrimination against women. Rather, despite expressing warmth toward emerging female scientists, faculty members of both genders appear to be affected by enduring cultural stereotypes about women's lack of science competence that translate into bias. These findings strongly suggest that in academic science, interventions to address subtle gender bias might advance the goal of increasing women's participation and advancement in science. Underrepresentation of women at the higher ranks of medicine and science in this country is well established. Career advancement of female scientists is reported to be adversely affected by gender disparities in startup packages, salary, and grant application review processes. Because attainment of career development awards is associated with subsequent grant funding, understanding and targeting potential sources of bias in grant selection processes could be particularly important in improving the career advancement of women and in funding promising research. Staff at the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation became concerned about gender disparities in competitions for their Clinical Scientist Development Award. This would be the equivalent of the AHA Career Development Award. They noted that between 2013 and 2016, over 4 rounds of competition, women only attained 5% of awards, whereas men attained 13% of awards. Additionally, they noted that there were specific components of applications that could elicit biased remarks. Specifically, some words when used in proposals submitted by men included scientific, creative, top, best, and able. Some words assigned to women included personal, active, remarkable, perfect, tremendous, and protected. After identifying the bias, the organization took a number of steps. They specifically decided to provide guidance to those providing recommendations. They encouraged them to please address why the applicant's record and accomplishment merited early career development support. They also were asked to detail the mentorship role they would take with this applicant, and how would they and their mentorship team use their professional influence and scientific knowledge to promote research and career advancement of the applicant. They also advised them to please avoid referring to personal circumstances or attributes of the applicant. This might include marital status, gender, juggling of work-life balance, and roles of the applicant outside of the professional setting. The AHA, working with the Doris Duke Foundation, has also removed gender bias terms from program descriptions, proposal instructions, peer review criteria, including training materials, and third-party materials, including reference reports and training plans. We do understand that, especially during this time, it can be difficult to avoid referring to personal circumstances or attributes. We just do ask that you keep in mind the potential for bias when including that information in your recommendations. Racial bias. There are many studies in the area of racial bias. One recent study examined how intersecting stereotypes about gender and race influence faculty perceptions of postdoctoral candidates in STEM across the country. More than 250 biology and physics professors from 8 large public US research universities were asked to read one of 8 identical CVs, depicting a hypothetical doctoral graduate applying for a postdoc position in their field. They were asked to rate them for competence, hireability, and likability. The candidate's name on the CV was used to manipulate race and gender, with all other aspects held constant. Faculty in physics exhibited a gender bias favoring the male candidates as more competent and more hireable than the otherwise identical female candidates. Further, physics faculty rated Asian and white candidates as more competent and hireable than Black and Latinx candidates. Those in biology rated Asian candidates as more competent and hireable than Black candidates, and also as more hireable than Latinx candidates. An interaction between candidate gender and race emerged for those in physics, whereby Black women and Latinx women and male candidates were rated the lowest in hireability. However, like the previous study, women were rated the most likable across all candidates. These results highlight how understanding the underrepresentation of women, as well as racial minorities in STEM, requires examining both racial and gender biases, as well as how they may intersect. One of the first studies documenting racial disparity in NIH funding was published in 2011. This study showed the award probability for Black principal investigators between 2000 and 2006 was roughly 55% of that of white PIs of similar academic achievement. NIH vowed to study potential reasons for this injustice. Yet, over a decade later, this gap persists. Between 2014 and 2016, Black applicants' awards rates remained at approximately 55% of those for white PIs. In another paper recently published in Science Advances, NIH delved into the underlying factors associated with this funding gap between Black scientists and their white counterparts. They identified 3 decision points where disparate outcomes arose between Black and white researchers. 1, the decision to bring applications to discussion during peer review study section meetings. 2, impact score assignments for those applications brought to discussion. And 3, a previously unstudied factor, topic choice. This is what the topic the investigators chose to study. While we won't show all of the data, the first point addressed, the decision to bring an application to discussion during peer review study section, is very significant. NIH analyzed nearly 160,000 R01 applications, both new and renewals, between 2011 and 2015. They confirmed previous findings that Black researchers submit fewer applications as PI than white researchers. Applications with Black scientists as PIs were brought to discussion in peer review only 77% as frequently as applications from white researcher PIs. When applications from Black researchers were discussed in study section, they received worse impact scores. Combining lower submission rates, lower discussion rates, and worse impact, it was again confirmed that Black scientists receive R01 funding only half as often as their white peers. Why is this so significant? As we discussed with gender bias, promotion and tenure committees frequently use research grants, especially NIH R01 equivalents, to gauge a biomedical researcher's long-term viability. Thus, the racial disparity in NIH R01 funding leads to many failed tenure cases for Black faculty members. This data suggests that Black PIs need to spend twice the amount of time grant writing to achieve the same funding level as PIs, as white PIs. And this excessive burden, no doubt, leaves Black faculty less time to do research, publish papers, gain exposure, train and inspire diverse students, and attain the promotions and positions needed to advance through academia. Finally, this analysis shows that all 3 of the factors that underlie the funding gap, preference for some topics over others, assignment of poorer scores, and the decision to discuss an application, revolve around decisions made by peer reviewers. Being aware of unconscious bias is the first step in mitigating these sources of bias, and greater awareness of unconscious bias will lead to an improved peer review process and greater parity in grant and award distribution. To confront your own biases, you must first recognize them. We strongly encourage everyone to consider taking an implicit association test to identify your own personal bias. All results are anonymous, and this is an evidence-based approach to mitigate biases in decision-making. As you conduct your peer review, please periodically evaluate your judgments and consider whether unconscious bias may be influencing your decision. Spend sufficient time evaluating each application. Studies have shown that peer reviewers who were busy or distracted by other tasks gave women lower scores than men for the same written evaluations. Please maintain your standard and apply the criteria consistently to all applications throughout the peer review process. Research shows that different standards might be used to evaluate applicants of different genders. Please also evaluate everyone's entire application. Don't rely too heavily on only one element of the proposal to evaluate an applicant. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thanks for the excellent presentation. It's very informative. I'm Baskey from University of Wyoming. I just have a quick question.
Sure.
Yeah. Specifically talking about the implicit biases, it is very subtle, and the person's even when the person takes all kind of these evaluatory or tests, online based tests, it becomes very subtle in terms of reviewing the applications and giving the scores. So I liked in one of your slides, you explain about the specific terms that are used by males and females in giving in their grants, and that had an influence. So what is the strategy that is generally should be followed or should be avoided by a reviewer to potentially minimize and eliminate these kind of biases? I understand the
Right.
trainings help, but yeah, please.
No, of course, yes. You know, and I think just being cognizant of, you know, the 7 that we focused on today, but I think with respect to gender, again, we've really encouraged everyone in our proposal submissions to use non-gendered terms, they, them, their, you know, again, we just trying to not have it constantly be, you know, reminded that the applicant is female, the applicant is male, the applicant might not identify with a specific gender, just, you know, to really try not to make any of those assumptions as you're evaluating the proposal. And again, you know, just we do it and we did this in our fellowship peer reviewers. You know, we just had a checklist, like I said, of the biases that we covered today. And when we started to hear statements around maybe institutional bias or expertise bias, you know, to ask the committee to step back and reconsider, you know, and think critically about what's presented solely in the proposal.
Thank you. And just one comment I want to make here is that this is a very important effort that American Heart Association has taken, and I'm very thankful for giving this kind of information.
Thank
you so much. Yeah.
Oh, of course. Again, we're certainly going to continue it, and we hope to have a more structured program in the fall. I do see that there are Carlitos, I think you have your hand raised.
Yes, hi, thank you for very nice presentation and very compelling. I would like to point out something about review process. That's something that I do not believe you touch, and it might be confused with the halo bias. It is what is called the seniority bias. Sometimes when you are in, can you hear me well?
Yes, I can hear you.
Fantastic. So I have seen this several times during study sessions where you can have 2 different proposals of the equal quality, although it's very hard to qualify that because it's a qualitative measure, right? But one will come from a senior well-known scientist, while the other one will be from a junior faculty. And usually you see that when the junior faculty is being penalized for little details, no controls, no well done, etc., while the senior faculty, usually the comment that you hear is like, oh, they have been in the business for so long, they know, they will address that. That's not a problem. So in a way, senior faculties can be quote unquote sloppy in the writing, and just because they are highly productive, they are supposed to, they will take care of that. Yeah, so how absolutely. Do you think we should, how do you think this should be addressed?
Yes, we came across a couple of instances like this in our fellowship peer review. And again, peer reviewers brought this to that attention. And again, you know, would say, you know, this individual might be a very senior investigator with a long track record of working with trainees. However, you know, the information presented in the proposal was only this, you know, and certainly not to really compare it to another proposal, but again, evaluate solely what is provided, and not to make the assumption that, again, because of their track record or their institutional support or other details, you know, we really need to rely on what's in the proposal and not make any assumptions outside of that.
Yeah, and do you know, I mean, because I don't see that kind of discussion done a priori. Is usually during the review process. So I think that it will be advisable to bring that up to people, because I have seen it more than once. I mean, I review grants for different institutions, and I have seen it more than once, and it really creates an uncomfortable situation.
Absolutely. And I, should mention that since we transitioned to Proposal Central, reviewers on any application, after you've submitted your preliminary scores and critiques, you have the ability to look at the other preliminary critiques. I don't believe you see the scores, but you do see their comments. So again, and this is prior to the meeting. So that would be a great opportunity if you did see something like that, to reach out to AHA staff and note, that this could be a potential bias. And then we would make sure to loop in the chairs. We have a constant dialogue with our chairs during these meetings, so that as questions arise, we can make sure that they do bring them to the committee.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, it's Jesus Vallejo from Baylor. You just hit the nail on the head. I think that the issue that is being brought up is really the responsibility of the chair. Having been a chair myself at several study sections, it's my responsibility to bring those issues up when things are being discussed. I think another really good example of bias is when an application for a fellowship or for a career development award comes from a historically Black college or university, or from a Hispanic, a primary Hispanic serving institution, that people need to be aware that resources at those places are still really good, and not right away say, well, how can they do this because they're at an HBCU? So I think those are really important. I have taken several implicit bias tests, and I encourage everybody on this call to do it. You can do it through the Harvard, website, and I suggest that you take the white, black, and the gender one. And the goal of this is not to eliminate everything, because it's impossible to do that. The goal of this is for us to be aware about our own implicit bias and come up with our own strategies to mitigate that. At least that's the way I look at it.
Yes, thank you. And I really appreciate, you contributing that. I think that we're certainly now trying to, I think on one end of the scale is to completely de-identify anything in the proposals. And the other is, complete transparency. And like you said, calling out specific institutions, specific trainees, where do we find that middle ground? But again, we wanted to start somewhere, and that's why we picked this unconscious bias training, so that we at least will have a baseline moving forward. And as we implement measures, we can see how that affects the scoring.
This is Blanca Camorete Mercado. I have a question - a comment. I think that, of course, this module on biases is crucial, and I think that is nevertheless a first step for the bigger problem of the disparities and equity. I guess that mitigating our own bias is important, but I don't think I wonder, where does the process of implementing more equity starts? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that if sometimes, looking at an application that comes, let's say, for a female minority that has a lower opportunity to advance, it's good that we don't know bias against that situation, but at the same time,
Right.
It's a disparity there, and a problem for equity there. And I don't know I know as a reviewer, we have just to go and take in consideration the merits of the science and the application, etc. But then where does the problem start being solved if it's not at our level? Yes, mitigating our bias is important, the first step, but that it might not be at all enough.
Absolutely. And again, I think that's one of the conversations we're having, particularly.
Yeah, let me, if you, just a second. So, I'm 100% with you, but I think it starts somewhere. The other thing that you're talking about, inequities, I don't know if you saw a recent publication looking at the pay for females and specifically the pay for African American and Hispanic females in academic medicine. It's pretty outrageous, right? But then, you know, we talked about the institutions, right? I mean, that's the institution's job also to address that, not just the HA, but the institutions at where, you know, African American women or Hispanic women are faculty members, right? Because that's where they're getting paid less, right? You know, a grant has a given dollar amount, no matter if you are, you know, male or female. The biggest hurdle is to make sure that you don't go into the review session saying that the male obviously has better science because he's a male versus a female. And so I think that's really important to understand that. You know, I'm the Associate Dean of Admissions at Baylor, and I've done so much of this implicit bias because you can imagine how having implicit biases affects the whole admissions process. So it's a really hard work, and I have to commend the AHA for taking this step to move us forward towards more inclusiveness and equity and inclusion.
Thank you. Yes, and that's something that, again, that we're bringing to our peer review subcommittee and other AHA volunteers. You know, again, based on the peer review criteria we have, how much flexibility do we have in our funding decisions? Again, you know, still funding the best science based on the scores, but again, ensuring diverse applicants. Again, as you can imagine, we receive, you know, over 4,000 applications a year, and there are many scientific ties, if you will. So that is something, you know, that we strongly consider, and that, you know, we're transparent about with our peer review subcommittees and our volunteers, you know, because it is so important, not only to our overall mission and our 2024 impact goal, but just, you know, moving forward, this is always going to be a priority.
This is Agricola from University of Tennessee in Knoxville. Thank you very much for a very informative session. It looks to me, when I look at all the different kinds of biases, it looks like a lot of them could be dealt with merely by blinding the review process. So I'm just wondering, how soon do you see AHA kind of giving reviewers the opportunity to basically just review the applications purely based on content with no identifiers of the applicant or the institutions?
Right. And again, it's something we are discussing with our volunteers. We are trying to find this happy medium, if you will, for lack of a better term. Again, the track record and some of the identifying information is used in the evaluation. And so, you know, we want to be careful about how much we take out. But again, on the flip side, we also, again, want to make sure that we are addressing applicants, you know, that are female or from an underrepresented group or at a historically Black university or college. So it is about striking a balance and not having, you know, not taking out too many important factors, not trying to go too far in the other direction. And again, I think we're hoping that, you know, we do send out a survey to all of our peer reviewers at the conclusion of the peer review committees. And we really take that feedback very, very much to heart. And we read every comment and we share it with our research committee. We share it with our peer review subcommittee. We share it far and wide. And we, you know, then we take those comments and we make a number of recommendations and evaluations each year to continue to improve that process. So, you know, sharing that type of feedback is really important and the best way to help us move the barometer one way or another.
Hey Jessica, just a quick question. I was wondering, this is Rama from University of Alabama in Birmingham. I was wondering, is this a new process that you started this cycle or started last year? I was just wondering about that.
Yes, it is new. We did our first iteration of this training with our fellowship review committees, and we were encouraged to continue it through our Career Development Award and our Diversity Supplement peer reviewers as well. So we do plan to offer this training for all of our peer review committees moving forward. we do hope to develop this more as the year goes on, and have a bit of a more formal training in the fall. But yes, this spring is the first iteration across all of our peer review committees.
Sounds good. Thank you.
And I did put my email in the chat. Anybody who is interested in the slides and the recording, I'm happy to share them. Zoom does capture some emails, so I will send them out to the emails that I have. Again, however, if you're for some reason your email isn't available in the Zoom report that I pull, please don't hesitate to get in touch. I'm happy to share all this information. I'm going to stop the recording.